We all do it. Some of us do it more than others, and most of us cherish it. During those heavenly hours when we go into sleep mode, some weird and wonderful things happen to us. Sleep is the final frontier, a place where dreams burst into life, but also a place where strange and sometimes dangerous things happen. As you'll find out today, there's a lot more to sleeping than you think, and it's really only the last few decades that we've begun to understand the importance of having a good slumber. Without further ado, welcome to the Sleep Zone. Number 15. Around 1.4% of people sleep with their eyes open, a condition known as nocturnal lagophthalmos. It simply means they cannot close their eyelids during sleep, with some folks sleeping with their eyes fully open and others just partially open. They have no idea they're doing it since they're asleep, but it looks pretty freaky to other people. There are other reasons why someone might sleep with their eyes open, relating mostly to disease, trauma, and autoimmune conditions. Number 14. In 2010, a man named Gregory Macon said he was kicked off a U.S. Airways flight because he was caught sleeping with his eyes open. He'd fallen asleep before the plane had even taken off, but when one of the cabin crew saw him sleeping with his eyes open, she thought he was ill and asked if anyone on board could help. There was actually a nurse on the plane, but she had no idea why someone would sleep with their eyes open. She had not heard of nocturnal lagophthalmos, and while Macon explained that he'd often slept this way, in the end, the crew decided he wasn't fit to fly. He wasn't very happy about this at all. Okay, coming up to the top 13. Now we have some really strange things to tell you. Number 13. You cannot sneeze while you're sleeping. Number 12. Studies have shown that people have a worse night's sleep when there's a full moon. Why that happens is confusing, but the obvious answer might be because of the light of the moon. That doesn't seem to be the case though, because when scientists in Switzerland watched people as they slept during a full moon, the subjects were literally kept in the dark. They were figuratively kept in the dark too, since they had no idea what the experiment was about. The scientists found that when the moon was full, on average the people spent 30% less time in deep sleep and slept less time overall. It also took them longer to fall asleep. Some scientists believe that humans are naturally attuned to the moon's cycle, and that's why its fullness affects our sleep. More studies have been undertaken with mixed results. One study showed kids slept longer during a full moon, but another revealed again that adults slept less. Number 11. Back when the British were leading the Industrial Revolution, a new job came onto the scene so that people could get to the factories on time. This job was called a knocker-upper. For a few pennies a week, some guy would come around to workers' houses and knock on their doors or windows, or use a pea shooter to hit the higher-level windows. In the 19th century, the author Charles Dickens wrote about the occupation, but knocker-uppers were still around in the 1970s. The first personal alarm clock was invented in 1787, but we guess not everyone in Britain's industrial cities had one. Number 10. Things can turn ugly if you wake someone up who's experiencing something called sleep terrors or night terrors. These are very intense nightmares. Fortunately, only around 1% of adults suffer from regular night terrors. And while someone might thrash around a bit or scream out, the person next to them will usually not be harmed. That's not always the case though, and we found instances where people had attacked their partner during a night terror. During the frenzy, the dreamer might also hurt themselves. This is how one woman described how her husband would sometimes act during sleep. He seemed to have the strength of 10 men and shoot straight up from the bed onto his feet in one motion. He's landed clear across the room on many occasions and has pulled down curtains, upset lamps, and so forth. He's grabbed me and pulled on me, hurting my arms. There are many reasons why someone might have night terrors, from substance abuse to childhood trauma to PTSD to a family history of parasomnia. Number 9. According to the National Sleep Foundation, you should wash that pillow of yours at least once every 6 months, and you should replace it after a year or two. The reason is dust mites. These little fellas can impair breathing and worsen allergies. Number 8. Babies are another thing that really get in the way of a good night's sleep. It's reported that a new person in the house will result in 400 to 750 hours of lost sleep for parents. Number 7. Major global events can make many people have a bad night's sleep. A big event might have the effect for many months, as many people have experienced during the coronavirus pandemic. Other major sleep disturbers have been 9/11, the Challenger space shuttle disaster, and the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. While it's good to know about current events, we can certainly consume too much news. Sometimes you have to tune out and just be in the moment. Number 6. When your stress levels are high, the hormone corticosteroid can negatively impact the effects of the immune system. A vicious cycle that can happen is a person is stressed and sleeps less, and the next day the lack of sleep means that they deal with stress worse. They might then sit in front of the TV watching news media that sounds apocalyptic, and this creates more stress, which creates sleeplessness and a repeating cyclical pattern. Number 5. Some people dread going to bed and falling asleep, a condition called somnophobia. One sufferer in the UK explained it like this: I'd stay up listening to my mom snoring just to make sure she was alive. I was petrified that if I slept, something bad might happen, and I wouldn't be awake to help. Some of these people might fear the loss of control they have during sleep, or they might worry about what could happen while they're unconscious. Some sufferers have said the fear comes from having had night terrors or bouts of sleepwalking, while for others a traumatic event in the past has caused the dread of the bed. Okay, we're getting to the end now, but there's still so much more to tell you about sleep. Number 4. 5 to 7 million kids in the US wet the bed, although by the time kids reach the age of 10, only about 2 to 3% of them wet the bed. One study we found said that 1 in 50 teenagers in the US wets the bed. Okay, so why do some folks wet the bed in the first place? It could be a number of things, such as the child having a smaller than average bladder or the fact that both his parents were bedwetters. It might also be the fact that they have lower than average levels of hormone vasopressin, or simply the fact that their sleep is just too deep. Stress and infections can also be a reason. Number 3. According to the experts, counting sheep as a strategy to fall asleep is useless. Number 2. Some studies have shown that if you regularly sleep well, you might deal with pain better. In those studies, the scientists allowed participants to sleep a certain number of hours. When they were later tested to see how they dealt with pain, the people who had slept more seemed to feel less. So much so, it was as if they had taken codeine. Number 1. Lastly, we'll tell you about the horror of something called fatal insomnia. This is a rare disease, thank God, which affects the brain. It happens because of a tiny genetic mutation in the brain, but that mutation in time will mean that the sufferer will find it very hard to sleep. The insomnia will get worse, and this will lead to hallucinations, delirium, and finally death. It might take many years for the person to show the symptoms, but once they do, there's no going back. Over a period of months, the person will suffer from panic attacks, which will lead to paranoia, and then the hallucinations will occur. Next will come weight loss, and finally, when the patient hasn't slept for a long time, they'll become unresponsive. It could happen when the person is as young as 18, or it might not happen until they're in their 60s. There's no cure for this nasty disease, and even the strongest sleeping pills or other sedatives don't seem to help. It's just one long, agonizing nightmare, so we can be glad that only around 40 families have been known to carry this gene.